serve people
in progress.
Here in the Zendo. And we're trying out a laptop so that I can see the Zoondo as well as the Zendo and the people in it. So good morning, everybody. It's great to see you here. Thanks for coming. We've been having a blast, really, at work weekend. How many bags of garbage did we pick up? 12 bags of garbage. And that was only one of many things. So I thank you again, Alex. You've just been really great at getting this all set up and getting me all settled down along with all the equipment and the other people. I really appreciate it. And today I want to talk about three things. First is a talk by Carol Awada, who is a leading member at Clouds and Water Sangha, and gave a talk in February that is still very much resonating in my body. And I wanted to share some of what she had to say. I want to talk about how it's affected me a bit, and I want to talk about where we can take it. Carol is of Japanese heritage. Her parents were incarcerated during World War II, and she has been on the Clouds and Water board. She has been in the grievance leadership for the grievance group, which we've needed on more occasions than we would like to admit at Clouds and Water, but we're very glad to have that process. And she has been an activist, as she said, and became a Buddhist activist after a while, in part influenced by the experience of her ancestors. And she spoke very eloquently to the concern we all are sharing now about how can we recognize and join together with, I'm going to use the label BIPOC, which is inadequate and kind of not at all elegant, and I'll use white so that we can talk about the things she had to say a little more easily. I want you to be able to hear some of what she had, a lot of what she had to say, but I want you to know that what you're going to be hearing is not her talk, although I put the link to her talk in the chat box. It's on the Clouds and Water website. And I want you to know that what you'll be hearing is my hearing of what she had to say in that talk, which I'm learning to be sensitive to what happens with our minds and our hearts. It's like we probably all played telephone at some point in our life, and we know that sometimes what gets said is not what the speaker could recognize as what they said. And so just please know that I highly recommend. It's one of the best talks I think I've ever heard in my life. And it's deep. It's had a deep impact on me. I've known Carol for a long time. I and she distinctly remember her coming through the door at Clouds and Water and being greeted, and I was the head greeter that day. And there was something that clicked for us, and we had a good long conversation. So we have a long history. I also want to start as I've learned to do at Clouds and Water and continue to kind of struggle with and feel somewhat uncomfortable around, which is acknowledgments to those who have made it possible for us to be sitting here together. So I want to acknowledge that this very property and the property that the Clouds and Waters Zen Center, where I'm a teacher, is stolen land. It was brutally stolen. We forced out our ancestors forced the indigenous peoples out in the middle of December in Minnesota and said, you can't be here anymore. So that's a sharing of what's been true. And it's an opportunity for us to just not only remember and reflect, but also to ask, in what way can we support those peoples who are still deeply suffering, not only from what happened then, but what is still happening. Although I'd also like to appreciate the Pope for making some very freeing statements about something called the doctrine of discovery, which was a very important papal ban that upheld the possessing of people of lands in violent ways, and was used and still is very much a part of judgments made concerning properties and other issues all the way up to the Supreme Court in our country. I would like to acknowledge Black peoples and Asian peoples that have been important. All of those in this country have a history of having their labor stolen, of being enslaved. And yet they have made it, we couldn't have this country without what they gave us. So I want to just not forget that and keep remembering it. And once again, I don't think any of us could honestly say we think that the discriminations that led to that approach to those peoples have been repaired or are no longer true. So we can ask ourselves, what can we do to support the elimination of that mindset, of that way of treating people. And I also want to especially call out the recognition that this practice that we do is from our ancestors in Japan and China and Korea and India and Thailand, many of whom have not been treated as equals. And here I'm reminded by my BIPOC friends that it's super important to them to have an acknowledgement that their ancestors are the reason that we have and can appreciate the benefits of this practice. And here we need to just ask ourselves what's the best way of honoring that and recognizing it. So I want to thank Carol for her talk. Bow down, 9 bows. Carol, as I said, is of Japanese heritage. Her talk was entitled, or is entitled, BIPOC Buddhism and My Experience as an Asian American Buddhist. So here, let me just reflect on some of the messages that I heard. Carol started by helping me as a teacher and a leader here and at Clouds and Water by first saying thank you to the people that were helping with the Zoom, the people that invited her to talk, the people that were helping her in the room. And usually for me that's a lesson, because I'm, like many people who speak, nervous about me. So I appreciate that example. We teach so much, and it's part of our tradition to teach by what we're doing. And I really appreciate how subtle and deep and expansive that teaching has been in my life. So Carol said she wanted to share some insights. And like I said, I would like to share some of my insights into my own practice and my life. And I'd like to also talk about what the implications for those learnings are for me in my life, as well as for Hokyoji and Clouds and Water. Carol did something something also very important, I think, which was she started by kind of giving us an understanding of where she was coming from and what she was going to be saying. She said, I'm speaking from my heart, and while you may agree with me, please, if something disagreeable arises, let's all take refuge in the practice of mindfulness. She said, I'm aware that Clouds and Water supports creating a culture of non-harming. The change takes time. I support that, and I'm active in it. And I can tell you that part of what came out of a transformative visit by Reverend Angel, who I think her last name is Williams, but I could easily be wrong about that. She's written books. She is a Black woman Buddhist teacher, and she and Carol and a group of BIPOC people at Clouds and Water were included in, they invited her to come, were supported by Clouds, and planned with the head teacher, Sosan, how she would be brought, how that would be supported in our budget, and what that retreat would look like. And a profound change came as a result of it starting with about a day and a half of BIPOC only. So there weren't any white people in the building, and there weren't any white people in the room. White people, or whites, were invited on the Sunday that they were still holding, and there was a chance for us, actually it might have been a Saturday, there was a chance, I was included in the people that accepted and attended that part, and it was a chance for us to hear and feel and observe the energy of our BIPOC group, which was remarkable. They were alive and joyful in a way that we've never had a chance to observe, because it had never had the circumstances to arise in that way. And then we spent some time introducing ourselves, talking about why we were here, and how, and particularly Reverend Angel invited the BIPOC people to share how it felt to come into a room where they didn't have to count how few there were of people of color, and where they'd gotten to spend several days practicing Buddhism in a way that I have no details about, but was obviously enlivening for them. And this was a deeply sobering experience for me as a white person, and I think for everybody as a white person. It was not entirely it was disagreeable for some. It ruffled us. And yet there was just Reverend Angel was very skillful, and people felt comfortable enough to come forward and be vulnerable about what they didn't know, what they were scared about knowing, how much they cared and felt stupid, their feeling of inadequacy. So it was a very transformative event. She did come back at a later time, so we got 2 visits, and she has not been back since. She is extremely active in the United States and a wonderful teacher that's just super grounded. And I would say that Carol was not only, I guess she emerged even more as a leader and a Buddhist practitioner and activist in our Sangha. Her flowers were really watered, and she's grown. So, what did Carol have to say? She talked about her Asian roots. She talked about how American Buddhists didn't work for her. And she talked about what did she mean by American Buddhism, and what about it didn't work for her, and what about the opportunities to establish and continue in a BIPOC, I'll call it the group, but it's really its own Sangha within the umbrella of Clouds on Water. And so I'm going to share some of what I heard. She said, BIPOC do not feel at home or embraced in the overwhelmingly white Buddhist Sanghas because they are so few, because they are nourished by different aspects of Buddhist teaching than whites. Specifically, what is important in the BIPOC community to Carol and many others is the whole issue of race and the whole appreciation of community. And what they experience in white Buddhist Sanghas is what is labeled by them as white Buddhism. And it's the tendency of white people to say, I want to sit and concentrate on this practice for myself, and I don't particularly want to have to worry about the world in the process. So a kind of taking up of an idea of monastic practice and or preferred practice. So I don't have to interact, essentially. I can just work within. And I'm one of those people. I'm one of those people that says, yeah, let me put my energy first and foremost and mostly into my own practice. That's not irrelevant, but the way it's done is not welcoming, especially for BIPOC communities whose super important safe refuge is most commonly in community. When they come into white Buddhist communities, they don't see any leadership that isn't white. On the board, that's teachers, and any, I may be sounding extreme, but my experience is every Sangha that I walk into in the Twin Cities, and I've walked into pretty much all of them, doesn't have very many faces of color. And that's true, has been true in my experience at Clouds on Water. BIPOC suffer from generational trauma. It is, scientifically speaking, in their DNA. And while I've become, familiar with that fact, I, like all of us who are white, don't entirely get that. And we usually, in our white Buddhist practice, don't concern ourselves with what we're doing and how that might be helping or not helping our BIPOC people. And I say our, and there you go. So we begin to hear the language that with maybe some more understanding of BIPOC hearing. It's not that it's not our Sangha, but it's the picture I get in my head is the picture that our BIPOC people receive, I think. That's how I'm understanding it, is you walk in the door and you count how many other BIPOC people are here. And I, as a white person, am inviting you into my house. And there's not necessarily a active awareness of the sense of safety or vulnerability that might be true for anybody of BIPOC, because they always have to count. And probably some of us, I know I can say, yes, when I was working in corporate America, I counted too, because I was often the only woman in the room at the companies I was part of, at the stage I was part of. So yes, I know something about how that feels, and so do other white people. So this is not a, an exotic thing. But our community doesn't really speak and behave, nor do we picture in our head necessarily what it feels like to have you always be kind of a guest in the house, and how that affects your practice. So, some words. BIPOC suffer from generational trauma that can be unacknowledged, not well understood by white, and not of evident importance to whites, who often are most focused on their individual Buddhist practice and might not want to deal with the issues of the world. Whites are often passive, if well-meaning, and use individual practice to bypass connections. Groups that enable BIPOCs to connect with honor in public ways of recognizing their parents, their relatives, their communities, lives, sacrifice, historical contribution. Carol relayed her experience of a visit to the Japanese American Museum that has a huge book that has 124,000 odd names of Japanese who were incarcerated during World War II. And there is a very healing process that she got to go through, where they asked before she visited for the names of her parents. And they found them. And they have a ceremony for marking not only the visit, but the, seeing, appreciating, remembering, sharing a public appreciation of the sacrifices that were made by her parents and grandparents, which is a big factor in what she teaches and how she's active. She and many other BIPOC have, they've got memories that we don't have, that are not common. We can talk about our ancestors, and there's plenty of suffering in the word. So it's not a dismissal of white suffering, but we never talk about it. It's not in the Buddhist, the American history books. It is, but it's not in there the way that white contributions and white suffering is. So that visit, what I heard Carol say about that was, when she made that visit, she had this incredible sense of belonging, of integration, of being whole, that she doesn't experience in white sanghas. BIPOC cannot assume that they are safe enough to be vulnerable in white sanghas. Race and community are central to BIPOC communities. And if you come into a room with people sitting silently that aren't acknowledging you, whether or if they are acknowledging you, it's not like greeting an old friend necessarily. It's going to be a place where mostly there's many white people that you don't share a lot of historic experiences with, and who your experience is in your DNA as being not safe people. So that sensitivity does not feel like it's supported. There's a consciousness of not fitting in. I'm conscious of greeting people. In Carol's case, I actually didn't know or wasn't aware or didn't ask about that she had a Japanese heritage. She was just Carol to me. And so maybe that's one of the reasons why we had an immediate clicking. But that's not the experience that a black person, for instance, or a person with disabilities, or a person who might fit our stereotype of queer would be greeted. There's a kind of politeness, but a distance that I'm aware of when I tune into it. Carol said, one needs to see oneself in the teaching. And I think we can all relate to that. I certainly can. And that's not what BIPOC can recognize easily as white Buddhism helps a BIPOC person to do. Observation and generalization to some degree, sanghas prevent programs that reflect other realities. BIPOC is required to fit in. I remember on more than one occasion when there was a conversation about needing to respond to BIPOC needs and our desire to welcome BIPOC and increase the number of BIPOC individuals in our Sangha. There would invariably arise the comment, why do BIPOC people need their own group? So you can imagine, we can put ourselves in the shoes, I do, of saying, which has sometimes happened to me, where I've walked into a room that's pretty much all black or all BIPOC. And how do I feel about that? Or I can just relate to walking into a room that's all men that are white, that are executives, and usually a foot taller than I am. It doesn't feel welcoming. It doesn't feel necessarily safe. You're guarded. Part of my feeling sometimes has been on alert to make the people in the room feel comfortable, so that because I stand out in a way that can activate all kinds of things. It's just a human thing, but it affects the ability to settle in and really connect. Well, Buddhism has always changed as it's moved from country to country. And it's adapted to different cultures. American Buddhism whitewashes and erases Asian roots of contribution. So there are, I remember being in conversations when I was at Great Vow, where somebody would say, oh, it's so Japanese, and, do we really have to, can't we drop some of these things? And, why do we have to, do what the Japanese do? It's really not American, it's not a welcoming. And I remember, for me, at least on one occasion, saying, well, what about the fact that Suzuki Roshi, who we read and revere, and who some of us have had as teachers, came to this country because there was a Japanese Sangha that had established a Buddhist practice here. And not only did they lose their temple to other people, not only did they work, despite the fact that they were in camps, to maintain that temple, to find a safe keeper and holder of that temple for them. But Suzuki Roshi basically left that post and devoted himself to establishing an American Sangha. So how do we show our appreciation of that? How do we recognize how vital it is to and not take it for granted and not miscommunicate about it, because the whole story about it doesn't mention the Japanese Sangha. It's like, we need to mention the Japanese Sangha. They're the reason we're here. They're the reason, that we're growing and changing in ways that we appreciate. Another thing that arises in the whitewashing process is a view that many Americans have, that we as Americans are more serious practitioners of Buddhism than people in Asian countries. And yes, there was a little test that said, dip this piece of paper in or take a lie detector test, the needle would move. Yes, I've had that perception. And I haven't been especially accountable for taking care of that perception in ways that don't hurt others. So, Carol then came to a section where she said, diversity, as we've seen in policing and in Buddhism is not enough to change. We need a cultural change. So what does that look like? And she said, Clouds and Water supports at this point, although it's gotten to that point, it's been a journey to get to where they are, on concentrating on creating a container of non-harming. That affects people that are different in any way. There's a man up on the hill, Karl Kaczynski, who was kind of entered into Buddhism at the same time I did, came and lived and practiced here, and he had cerebral palsy. He had been a UU person. He had been in Quaker Sanghas, and he was never accepted as a candidate to become a minister or a priest in those traditions because of his cerebral palsy. Maybe some other things as well. But it was just so uniform. And here, he was a good friend of mine, but I never said to him, do you want to become a priest here? I don't know what his answer would be about that, but he got cancer, and he died of cancer. That's, it's kind of, it's just coming to me now. Wow, I never asked him, even though it was clear that he really wanted to be a priest. But he kind of ran into some problems with the teacher we both started with, who had sex with one of the senior students. He's now married to her and divorced from his wife, but that definitely interrupted some of the process of those who are aspiring to become priests. So maybe Mios and Carl got caught in that. I'll have to find out more about that. Okay, so what else? What else is a container of non-harming? Here's what I heard. What marks it? First of all, there's leaders that are BIPOC. Board, teachers, key volunteers. There's mentoring that goes with that. There's support that goes with that. There's funding, financial concerns that go with that. People instinctively are aware of when people are treated as other. So it becomes a consciousness of the whole Sangha. White people readily pick up on microaggressions, racist, othering behavior, and calling out whites. So things like, I don't accept the invitation to share my pronouns. I got a problem with that. Automatic. It becomes automatic to see lack of equality. So it doesn't have to be explained. So why is this a problem? And they see the harm done to someone else as harm done to all of us. So that's something we all take up as Buddhists, but we probably all could find times that we can see in our own practice where we're not exactly attuned to that. Or, we're attuned to, like most of us, our a priority is me. Even though that doesn't keep us from being focused otherwise. So, now I want to talk about my personal digestion of what I heard from Carol. So let me start by talking about Reverend Angel, whose visit opened my wide eyes. And one of the things that I particularly remember her saying was to a white member, a male, who said, okay, so I've got like all the bad things, you know, I'm white, I'm male. And he said, what do I need to do? And Reverend Angel said, don't try to help me. Let me help me. Do try to help you. Work on your practice and where your growth is needed. That wasn't what I was expecting to hear. So, in my own reflections, how am I doing on time? Probably not so well.
No,
6 minutes?
16.
16? Okay. So here's what I notice about me. Things cannot change if I do not change. I'm a white person. I have that much agency. I think Carol is right when she, oh, did I read everything? Oh, I didn't. Let me just share the last things from Carol. She said, I heard, first, that she is committed to saving all beings. That she's passionate about the verse of the robe that says, wrapping myself in Buddha's teaching, I vow to free all beings. She thinks racism will end when whites decide to end it. That BIPOC can't wait for whites to end it, but have to follow their own paths individually and in community. That the paths may converge with paths of some whites, but cannot be forced. That BIPOC is not responsible to change the hearts and minds of those who practice through white frameworks. That she believed we all need liberation, and not just with our own small sufferings, but with how we create ourselves in the big core ones, the ones that are all tied up with our image and who we are, that are so hard and so scary to acknowledge. But though individual paths diverge, all of us depend on one another for liberation. Martin Luther King said, I can't be happy unless you're happy. I can't be liberated unless you are. That's true on both sides of the equation. BIPOC really know that. Whites, not so much. So that's part of my reflection for myself. Yeah. So things can't change if I don't change. I agree. Racism, despite my fondest hopes, isn't just going to somehow get better. It's still alive and well and killing people and hurting people in deep ways. So, racism can't end unless I decide to end it. Have I decided to end racism? Not exactly. I like the idea. But I'm hindered. I don't want to lose the ease and comfort of my life as it is. The difficult part for me is the shame, because I know, I'm hoping somebody else will fix it. I'll bring cookies or something like that. I can get by with the support and safety from sidelines. And that's not to minimize that there are many different ways to contribute to what's needed. But for me personally, I know my fear gets in the way of me bringing my full agency and effort to this arena, despite my vow to free all beings. So I know that I need to match my words and aspirations with my vows. But I'm really not all that reliable about doing that. I kind of come out, I'm skillful at inviting and hearing feedback about how I do or don't contribute to somebody's growth, comfort, happiness in the Sangha. But it's, it's a kind of like out and then I go back into my white hole, my white safety place. So, oh my goodness. There are some wonderful books with quotes in them that I didn't bring with. Oh no, they're in there. I know I'm taking too long, and you can walk out at any time or unzoom, but, we already are unzoomed. So our Zoomdo left. Does anybody want to have the chance to leave before I share these teachings? Okay, here we go. First, Katagiri Roshi. He says, we are all selfish. We can't get away from it. At the same time, we can't say with conviction, I must live with my selfishness. In other words, we can neither escape nor stay with our selfishness. Still, this doesn't mean we should think we can't be free of selfishness. And the crux of that is, if we are to take care of it in the best way, we have to open our hearts completely to our selfishness. This means that if you see others as your enemy, you have to realize that you are the enemy, not them. You have to realize that as you look at them, so they look at you. You have to let them look at you until you become the object instead of the subject. You have to look at yourself until you see yourself as they do. That's in a book that's entitled, You Have to Say Something. And this is from a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching, which wouldn't surprise me to hear many of you have on your bookshelf. I'm going to do this down here. So where do we want to start? Okay. This is in a section called Right Thinking. Thinking is two parts, initial thought and developing thought. An initial thought is something like, this afternoon I have to turn in an essay for literature class. The development of this thought might be to wonder whether we are doing the assignment correctly, whether we should read it one more time before turning it in, whether our teacher will notice if we hand it in late, and so on. In the first stage of meditation concentration, both kinds of thinking are present. In the second stage, neither is there. We are in deeper contact with reality and free from words and concepts. There are 4 practices related to right thinking. Are you sure? If there is a rope in your path and you perceive it as a snake, fear-based thinking will follow. The more erroneous your perception, the more incorrect your thinking will be. Please write the words, "Are you sure?" on a large piece of paper, hang it on your wall, and see it often. Ask yourself this question again and again. Wrong perceptions cause incorrect thinking and unnecessary suffering. This is what I usually entitle non-thinking. This is when I try to have continuous mindfulness. I try to notice. Not try to get rid of it, not have an opinion about it, not have, that churning thinking that goes with that. Just note it. And not noted and no thank you, but noted and felt in the body. What am I doing is the second thing to do. Sometimes I ask one of my students, what are you doing? To help them release their thinking. What are you doing to help, What are you doing to help release thinking about the past or the future and to return to the present moment? I ask the question to help them be right here, right now. To respond, you only need to smile. That alone will demonstrate your true presence. So many of us probably are familiar with the washing, are you really washing the dishes when you're washing the dishes? So I think probably some of us do practice in this way, but maybe not as often as we need to. Ask yourself, what am I doing? Asking yourself, what am I doing, will help you overcome the habit of wanting to complete things quickly. Smile to yourself and say, washing this dish is the most important job in my life. When you ask, what am I doing? Reflect deeply on the question. If your thoughts are carrying you away, you need mindfulness to intervene. When you are really there, washing the dishes can be deep and enjoyable experience. But if you wash them while drinking or thinking about or drinking about other things, I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of hard time with my eyeballs. You're wasting your time. Oh, this is important. So, if you're trying to wash them while thinking, you're wasting your time. You're probably not washing the dishes well either. And if you're not there, if you wash 84,000 dishes, your work will be without merit. The third one, hello habit energy. We tend to stick to our habits. Going back into my white cave, let's stick to our habits, even the ones that cause us to suffer. Workaholism is an example. Guilty. In the past, our ancestors may have had, or better still, hello habit energy. Workaholism is an example. In the past, our ancestors may have had to work nearly all the time to put food on the table. But today, our way of working is rather compulsive and prevents us from having a real contact with life. We think about our work all the time and don't even have time to breathe. Hello habit energy. That was me in corporate America especially. We think about our work all the time and we don't even have time to breathe. We need to find moments to contemplate the cherry blossoms and drink our tea in mindfulness. Our way of acting depends on our way of thinking, and our way of thinking depends on our habit energies. When we recognize this, we only need to say, hello habit energy. when I was at Great Vow Monastery, we sometimes practiced with a Thich Nhat Hanh Sangha. And so they would practice with the mindfulness bell, where they'd bring it on a regular basis and everybody would stop dead. I and many other of my colleagues at the monastery would find ourselves chattering, having not heard the bell, and have to catch up by virtue of seeing the silence that was around us. So it was a very constructive, if uncomfortable, practice to see that probably we were walking around thinking we were pretty good because we were in a monastery doing all this stuff every day, and that this was evidence that there was work that still needed to be done. The fourth one, bodhicitta. So just a quick review. Are you sure? What am I doing? Hello, habit energy. And then bodhicitta, our mind of love, is the deep wish to cultivate understanding in ourselves in order to bring happiness to all beings. It is or at least many beings. It is the motivating force for the practice of mindful living. With bodhicitta as the foundation of our thinking, everything we do or say will help others be liberated. Right thinking also gives rise to right effort. So I have to read these things because shame is a strategy, really, for not having to actually be with in my body the experience that arises when I'm not acting in accord with my picture and my vow. It's important to be able to say hello there and feel it in the body, experience it in the body. That way, the body, which the way I experience it is, the body doesn't lie, and the mind is, really about just trying to pull the picture together so that we can operate. I really appreciate that, but the body is a much more reliable source of bodhicitta. I can feel much more easily in my body. No, maybe not. A friend of mine has a great expression. She said, maybe a yellow light. So what are the implications for my practice, Clouds and Waters practice, and Hokyoji's practice? I would say one of the things that I just so bow down to Carol's talk about was, it was such a skillful talk, no matter what the topic was. The delivery was so skillful, but it really was a giant putting her practice on the line to say, come on down, let's work on this together, and give me my space, give me recognition, do your work, I'll do mine. I think that when I take that more into Hokyoji, where I'm just aware of, but not so willing to really put a lot of effort into being uncomfortable. I've done some of that, and like I said, I have a white K that I retreat to, and we each have to know how to take care of this self. How much resilience do we have? A therapist that I had a great relationship with and taught me a lot gave me an aid, which was, how far away do you need to be from the fire to be able to still experience it and take it in without panicking? So that's really helped me to recognize, especially in my body, when shame is there, and how then first let's calm down. Let's just say, okay, I take up the way of, not punishing myself for mistakes made and things left undone. So loving kindness practice, getting the right amount of sleep, doing my sitting, reading my texts. All of that, we each have, only ourselves can do that. And yet, we don't have to do it alone. So, I wonder if anybody has comments they'd like to share, questions they'd like to ask, and I'll put my speaker on in case. I know we're over. Oh. Okay, so there we go on that one. I need to use this guy. So please do feel free to get up and leave when it's right for you. I'm listening. Thank you all for coming. Zendo folks, Zoomdo. Oh, wait. No. To see how things feel.
I can start, if you'd like.
I'd love it.
Oh,
This is Kathleen. Thank you, Catherine.
It's always dangerous to say you have two things to say, because by the time you get through the first one, you forget. Well, I'll try.
Thank you. That's very comforting.
One is, thank you so much for all the thought and care you brought to that talk. When you mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh, through the power of the internet and how closely we can now experience teachings, when you talk about him, I hear him speaking and saying something like, "Dear shame, I hear you, I feel your pain. I will take care of you." This is his
Yes, I've used
feeling.
exactly those phrases myself.
Yeah. And the second thing I am remembering is a Japanese monk at Amaravati who did a New Year retreat I was on. And some of this talk was present in the Sangha there, lay Sangha, attending the retreat. This feeling that we're not doing enough, we're not good enough people because we don't do enough about such problems as you raised. And it wasn't 100% white group, but it's a very alive issue for people living in the London area and Britain generally. And his answer to us was, focusing on doing no harm is not nothing. That stayed with me a lot. It's not nothing.
Did you guys hear that on the Zoom? Can you hear? Okay. That's great. I'm writing that down. Or I'll go back on I'll watch myself and write it down. Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to say something, ask something, offer something? I think we finished.
All right. Thank you, Kyoku.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you, Zoomdo. Thanks for hanging out with us. And
Yes, thank you so much for being kind enough to continue listening.
And thank you to our work crew, work weekend. We got a lot of good work done this weekend. I think we'll get a little bit more done, perhaps today, if anybody wants to stick around. Let's see, events. We have events coming up. We have work weekend this weekend. Next weekend, we have a private yoga and Tai Chi retreat. And then we have Clouds and Waters Session coming up after that. Then some land care weekends, fun times. We always love visitors. Come on down anytime. Next week, we have Ryushin Jan, who's going to offer a talk for us. And we are entirely supported by your donations. There's a link in the chat. We certainly appreciate anything and everything, or you just being here. So thank you for that. And we can close with the 4 vows. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.
Beings are
numberless. We can do it another time if we want
Never
to.
mind.
I don't have a bell on me, but I am dinging the bell right now. It's great to see y'all. Take care.
Have a great Sunday, everybody. And thank you so much for listening.